There we go. Of course, the sounder for the day is the one that I loved and learned when I spent some time in London at the BBC. And of course, we were all reminded of that today as we saw a superb BBC television production of the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Quite a moving ceremony. Well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. Obviously, there's nothing I can add to it beyond what was shown to you, but perhaps some personal reflections might be helpful to us all, for all of us to take some lessons, both personally, maybe professionally, maybe relationally, from what we saw today. And it's maybe just mine, but then I'd encourage you to do the same thing. Those kind of lessons that you learned in your life, in your business, from what you saw today. So let's see if we can do just that. And I'll begin with a clever one. I had a client one time who, and I will describe him to you in more detail, who always reminded me to, here's what he said, hey, think Yiddish and dress British. Think Yiddish and dress British. And since we're coming up to the Jewish New Year, all of that might work out just fine. Program is Interesting Ideas. I hope we'll have a few of them. And that program begins right now. Well, once again, I'm going to remind you that this is New Year's time for us. Now, the Jewish New Year actually begins next week with Rosh Hashanah, and it goes through the days of awe to the festival, the highest religious festival in the Jewish faith, which is Yom Kippur. A very significant time, and I have found that that's a good time to really begin the new year. January 1st is fireworks and perhaps too much fire water, certainly a lot of football. Other than that, it's just kind of a day in the calendar in the middle of the cold season here in the Northern Hemisphere. So I like to begin New Year right now. And so we've been talking about how we're going to try and think and do better in the new year in the midst of all of the crises and challenges we have. And that's a good thing to remember as we perhaps join the British as an incredible celebration. Now, please keep in mind, the British took a whole day off to participate in the funeral of their monarch. But things aren't changing overnight. Not everything is good. What happened is the Queen's last act, and she insisted on being able to do it, even though obviously she was just right on death's door, that she met with a new prime minister, a woman prime minister, and that prime minister has her hands full of a variety of challenges, both economically, the energy situation, along with Europe. They're in some deep trouble, and she has to figure that out, and the Queen wished her the best, and I think she probably said a little prayer for her. So that's the meaning of the time that we're at. So New Year's, all right, Yiddish. He said, think Yiddish, and obviously what he was saying, he was a very successful man and a very polished man, and he meant by that is that there's real wisdom, even as he was a practicing Christian, in the news and the views, particularly of the Jewish religion, in terms of how you might live. So think Yiddish, and of course with a little grin he would say, when it comes to knowing how, since he was in the financial affairs, he said, they tend to know how to do money and business quite well. They seemingly have a real knack for that. So it's always helpful to think a bit Yiddish. But then he was always extremely well dressed. He loved my first chapter. Image is not everything, but it is the first thing. and he said, I made all of my people read that. No, we're not going to dress like everybody else. We're not going to dress like slobs. We're going to be Savile Row, which now is the premier, and I actually bought a suit from Savile Row. It's the only one I ever had some time ago when I was in London, and it is typically a very British gentleman's suit. Lasted for a long, long time. I think I kind of outgrew it in the ways you're not supposed to, but that's what he said. Think Yiddish, both in terms of some of the views of life, perhaps some of the views of life in business, and then think British. They know how to dress. They know how to put on a show. They know how to put on a performance. And, do that. Make your style, make your performance very, very British. Well, maybe that is helpful for you today. Well, it also reminded me as I watched the thing, and I usually get up at between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning because I want to get a lot done. I have a home office like many people, and it is very much connected. However, a lot of my work has to be done at the studio like I am right now, but I try and get a number of hours in before I perhaps make my way to the studio after breakfast around 8:30, 9 o'clock. I've put in quite a day before then. But my wife joined me for the first time because, of course, the program began at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she wanted to see the entire show. And she remembers, yes, this dates my wife and I. She actually remembers watching the coronation of the Queen on television. It was one of the earliest experiments in trying to do that. In fact, they didn't have live television, but what happened was it was filmed, the coronation in 1952, and then it was put on a jet plane and flown all the way. And it was quite to New York City, where then the pictures could be shown to the waiting audience in the United States. The technology has certainly improved. But just like 52 and now 2022, the pageantry and the pomp and circumstance and all of that remain pretty well unchanged. It's something that they will do for a long, long time. And I think it's important to understand, in the midst of all of the wokeness and change and smashing of tradition, that we saw very much that when you do tradition well, and where it is hopeful and helpful and useful, and not meant to put down or destroy, but to build up the finer parts of who we are, tradition and ritual and ceremony is very, not only useful, it can even be beautiful. So I oftentimes challenge people in their workplaces, and particularly in leadership. What are some of the rituals you have? What are some of the ceremonies you have? Is there a little bit of pageantry in what you do? Is there a little bit of showbiz in what you do? Or is it just a mundane, kind of mediocre, dreary workplace? Just a place where I have to go to work. Well, that's a good lesson to think about when you saw how the British did their ceremony. And I can tell you that when I was with the BBC, the traditions had passed, unfortunately, and many of them knew that they had passed. But a part of what the British did, even in the early days of their broadcasting, is that when the people were before the microphone, they dressed up. After all, they were on the radio, on the British Broadcasting Company, speaking to people around the world, and these were important people who were listening, so they dressed for leadership. And actually, some of the programs that were actually live, and there's a number of live programs, we see that in many of the TV programs we now have. If they were live radio, it was oftentimes that the announcers and the performers were not only standing by their beautiful BBC microphones, they were in tuxedos and formal wear. Can you imagine that now? They were in tuxedos and formal wear. Of course, there was a small live audience, but they were performing for the world. It was the BBC, the World Service. It's British, and the British wanted to be the best. That's what they aspired to. They were, after all, the people who had built an empire. In fact, they certainly dropped it, but the early BBC, in which the kings and queens spoke on, it was oftentimes called the Empire Service because it was meant not only to serve the people of Great Britain, but of course they had a worldwide empire. And of course there were a lot of British people who were all around the world who wanted to find out what was going back home in Britland or in the United Kingdom, and they would listen to the Empire Service to discover what was going on. Well, actually, as we now know, Queen Elizabeth was perhaps born and served, at least in the beginning, in different times. And she then had to deal. And this is what really came across to me. She was steady. Now, I've talked about that before. The importance of being steady. Now, there were a lot of good things that she did and a lot of good things that happened to her. But she had her share of difficulty. Obviously, she had family troubles. 3 of her 4 children, I think, land up in divorce and how that went through. We all know that. Even her son, Charles, was a difficult child, perhaps because he was raised differently and it was kind of insensitive because at that time you made sure that a boy should be raised to be a tough guy, to have character, have a toughness, and Charles wasn't quite suited for that, but he had to endure that. But in effect, he had a few scandals of his own, and we don't need to go into that, but all through that, Elizabeth, with the death of her mother, the death of her sister, the problems with the family, all of that, she remained steady because she was committed to the fact that through it all, she was supposed to serve in such a way to recognize and hopefully encourage the British people. That's what she was made to do. And of course, she has now been rewarded by seeing that they understood that. They got that. And isn't it remarkable to find out how people respond when they run into somebody who is steady and sturdy and sound and good and strong, which she was. And I love the picture of even back in the Second World War, she did not take princess privileges, I guess that's the term, and she actually served as an auto mechanic. And in fact, there were some stories that even later in her life, if she was in a car and something broke down, she was eager to find out perhaps what was wrong with it. That was the story of Queen Elizabeth, and of course, I don't need to repeat all the other stories. You're getting them all day and will for some time. But there are a couple things that I think would be important to perhaps remember that at least I got from it, and perhaps I can remind you of that. I'm Stan Houston, the Queen, the time of the United Kingdom, about kings and queens, and maybe some things we can learn. Because you know what? You can always learn from anything. You can always learn from what you see, what you do, what you experience. both the joy and the tragedy, you can always learn something if you are aware, if you want to, if you are the kind of person who seeks to be what every leader should be, whether you are a leader or not, to be a learner. And hopefully you learn a few things here. I'm Stan Houston, just a few more comments, and we'll be right back. One of the things that obviously was quite different, but intentionally so, is this was a funeral, of course. It was a religious service. But did you notice it was in Westminster Abbey, which is the location of the Church of England, and that Queen Elizabeth, by the very role that she has, is, quote, the defender of the faith, and she's not only the leader of the United Kingdom, she is actually the leader of the Church of England. And so it was a Christian service, unabashedly so. However, there were people from the Church of England. There were people from the Roman Catholic persuasion. There were people from what the British would call the free churches, which is those who are Protestant but not members of the Church of England. But it was Christian because the Queen was a Christian, and she made no bones about it. She said that was a part of her life. Now, she did not share it in great detail because she knew that that was not her role. Her role is to be that of a unifier. But of course, that's what she was, and the service was clearly that. They didn't try to be inclusive, whether you like that or not, but there are all kinds of other religions and religions that can be respected, but they were key, and she was key because she planned it, that it was readings from the Holy Scripture, and it was prayers to the Christian God, and it was in honor of what she believed to be a follower of Jesus Christ. That's what the deal was, and that's what the whole performance was about. She designed it to be very much what she wanted it to be. And obviously, we saw what she wanted. But it was also good to notice, and particularly in one of the speakers who pointed this out, that in effect, if we think about it, funerals, we think about beginnings and endings. And the Archbishop made a comment that, in effect, things that have beginnings and ends are usually not that important. The things that are eternal, that have no beginnings and no endings, are what we must really be aware of. It's not just the beginnings. It's not just the endings. Our lives have beginnings and they have endings, but the part that's truly important does not have a beginning, nor does it have an ending. The important things in life are those that reflect eternity. You may or may not agree with that, but that's what they said. And whether you agree with it or not, you have to deal with it because it's an idea, and a very different idea. And if it's true, it could very much change how we should do our own reality. So I'll just let that sit on your head for a while. And of course, the final one is the Archbishop commented that the latest address during the COVID season that the Queen had given, a radio address, she ended with that favorite expression of hers, which is, "We shall meet again." We shall meet again. And of course, as the funeral came to an end, she said to all there, and to her family, and to those who were followers as she was and is, and still is, indeed, we shall meet again. And with that hope and that promise, and that's more than a possibility, we will also remember to say, thank you for listening. Hopefully you'll come back, because we want to meet quite often, because hopefully we'll always be saying we will meet again. We will meet again. Best and blessings to you. Take care, and we'll be back with more thoughts about the new year and some things that just might flow out of the world we're in today. Love to hear from you. We can help you in a variety of ways. Our performance coaching is, I believe, powerful and effective, and we can help you in your business in a variety of ways. Reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. Check out how we can help you build your influence with witradio.net, witradio.net. Let's learn in 22-23 how we can expand our influence by learning how to use the modern media effectively, ethically, and powerfully. We can help you do just that. Best and blessings. Till next time. Bye for now.